The Blue Hour Diner kept its lights burning the way some people keep a candle in a window, out of stubbornness, and in case someone needed them. At 2 in the morning on a warm June night, June Calloway was the only waitress on the floor, refilling the sugar caddies and listening to the grill tick as it cooled, when the loose bell over the door rattled and changed her whole life without asking. She would think about that later, how the most important night of her life had announced itself with a cheap bell and the smell of burnt coffee. But right then, she only looked up out of habit, a damp rag in one hand, and saw a small boy in pajama bottoms and exactly one sneaker easing glass door open with both arms, slipping through the gap like water, finding the one crack it trusted. Behind him, framed in the doorway under the streetlight, stood a man in a suit that had cost more than June's car, looking at his own child the way you'd look at a fire you didn't know how to put out. She knew him. Everyone in the city knew him, at least the shape of him. Elias Vance, the single dad billionaire whose face turned up on the business pages and the gossip pages with equal regularity, the widower who owned half the harbor and, the rumor went, could not keep a nanny in his house for love or money. The papers had made a small, cruel sport of it that spring, the boy who refused every nanny. 7 of them, one columnist had counted. 7 women with sterling references and degrees in early childhood development, hired and gone, one after another, like matches struck and shaken out. None of that mattered at 2 in the morning. What mattered was that the boy crossed the whole empty diner, past the counter, past the pie case, past June's outstretched honey, careful, and ran straight to her, and wrapped both arms around her apron, and held on. June froze with the rag in her hand. The boy smelled of bedtime, clean cotton and a little sweat, the particular warm scalp smell of a child who should have been asleep 3 hours ago. He was shaking very slightly, the way the diner windows shook when a truck went by. Under her palms his ribs went in and out too fast, a bird's rhythm, and the linoleum was cold through her thin shoes, and the fryer oil had gone quiet, and the whole long room narrowed down to the weight of one small body that had decided she would do. "Okay," she said, because that was the word her hands knew, the word she used for spilled milk and bad nights, and the regulars who came in after a hard shift with nowhere softer to sit. "Okay, I've got you. You found me. You're found." The man reached them then and crouched, and his voice came out in the careful, level register of a person holding himself together with both hands. Theo, we talked about doors. We have a rule about doors." The boy did not let go of June. He pressed his face harder into her apron and said, muffled, "I don't want her. I don't want any of them. I want to stay here." He doesn't mean the man started to June and stopped, because he plainly did not know what his son meant, and was honest enough not to pretend. June crouched too, slowly, so the boy's arms could follow her down without breaking, until she was eye level with a furious, exhausted 6-year-old who had decided, against all reason, that a stranger in a coffee-stained apron was the safest thing in the room. "What's your name?" she asked him. "Theo," he said into her shoulder. "I'm June, like the month." She tipped her head toward the window, where the warm dark pressed against the glass, and a single moth batted the neon, its wings making a small dry tick against the glass tube. "It's my month right now. Whole thing's mine till July." That got her one eye suspicious, peering up. "That's not how months work." "Says who?" "Everybody." "Everybody's never worked the night shift," June said. "Out here at 2 a.m., the month belongs to whoever's still awake. Right now, that's you and me." She glanced up at the man, who had not moved, who was watching this exchange the way a man watches someone diffuse something. "And your dad, I guess, if he sits down before he falls down." Elias Vance sat down. June would remember that too, that he did it instantly, gratefully. A man used to giving orders folding into a cracked vinyl booth, because a waitress told him to. He looked, under the diner's flat light, younger and far more tired than the business pages had ever let him. There were salt-pale smudges of exhaustion under his eyes, and a day's worth of stubble he plainly hadn't planned on. And his expensive shoes had grass on them, as if he'd walked somewhere dark before he drove. "He hasn't slept through a night in 3 years," Elias said quietly, while Theo investigated June's apron pocket and found a golf pencil and a pad. "Tonight, the latest one left, at midnight. I've stopped being able to." He pressed the heel of his hand to his eyes for a moment, just one, and then put it down, embarrassed by it. "I drove him around. Driving sometimes works. He saw your lights." "Lucky lights," June said. "He doesn't go to people," Elias said. He said it the way you'd report a strange and confirmed fact, like a cold front. "Not since his mother. He doesn't run to people. He runs away from them." He looked at his son, who had climbed fully into the corner booth now, the good one, the window one, and was drawing something fierce and scribbly on June's order pad, the pencil hissing across the paper. "He ran to you." June looked at the boy in the best seat in the house, and something turned over in her chest, slow and dangerous, like the first wave that tells you the tide's coming in whether you're ready or not. "Yeah, well," she said, standing, reaching for the coffee pot because her hands needed a job. "I make a good grilled cheese. Word gets around." She raised her voice for the booth. "Theo, you want a sandwich? On the house, on account of you've got the whole month with me." The scribbling stopped. The boy looked up, and for the first time something in his face went uncertain and young instead of furious. "Cut how?" he said. It wasn't a question. It was a test, and even at 2 in the morning June could hear that it was the most important test in the world. "How do you like it cut?" "You're supposed to know," Theo said, and his voice wobbled. She always knew. And June Calloway, 26 years old, 11 hours into a 12-hour shift, with a grandmother to get home to, and a nursing school application open in 3 browser tabs, and no idea on earth who she was, looked at the broken, hopeful, testing face of a motherless boy, and made the only guess her heart would let her make. "Diagonal," she said. "Corner to corner. 2 triangles. Butter all the way to the edges so there's no sad, dry corner." That how she did it. The diner was very quiet. The grill ticked. Outside, a horn answered a horn far off, the city breathing in its sleep. Theo's chin crumpled, and then firmed, and then he nodded. One small, enormous nod, and said, "Don't tell my dad, but you did it right." "I won't tell him," June said gravely, and did not look at Elias Vance, who had turned his face toward the dark window and was sitting very, very still. She made the sandwich, butter to the edges, low and slow, the bread going gold in the pan, and the whole diner filling with that smell, warm and ordinary, and somehow enormous, the smell of somebody bothering. She cut it on the diagonal, and she did not know. How could she? That she had just walked through the only door in that man's fortress that had ever been left unlocked, and that nothing in any of their lives would ever sit quite the same way in its old place again. What she knew was that the boy ate the whole thing, crust and all, and fell asleep in the booth with a buttery crumb on his cheek, and one fist still curled around the golf pencil, and that his father watched him sleep like a man watching rain after a long dry season, and that when Elias Vance finally spoke, it was not to her exactly, but to the window and the streetlight and the warm June dark. "What would it take," he said, "to make you the answer to this?" And June, who had spent her whole life being useful to people who forgot her the moment they didn't need her, felt the old cold stone settle in her stomach, even as her heart leaned toward the sleeping boy, and heard herself say the truest and most dangerous thing she knew. "I'm not an answer, Mr. Vance. I'm a person. You'll want to learn the difference before your son does." He turned from the window and looked at her then. Really looked, the way you look at weather you didn't forecast. And June picked up the empty plate, the grease cooling on it under her thumb, and the night went on, and somewhere under all of it, the tide kept coming in. The Vance house in the city was the kind of place that had a name instead of a number, and a staff instead of neighbors, and a quiet in it like the quiet inside a bell after it stops ringing. Elias Vance had bought it the year everything changed, when the rooms he'd shared with Claire had become impossible to walk through, and he'd filled the new place with the best of everything, and lived in about 4 rooms of it, like a tenant in his own life. The other rooms he kept the way you keep a held breath. They were dusted and aired and never used, the furniture standing in them, like guests who had been promised a party that never came. Sometimes, crossing the marble hall late at night, he could smell the cold floral nothing of a house that nobody really lived in. Beeswax polish and cut hydrangeas the housekeeper renewed on a schedule, and he would think, with no feeling attached to it at all, that he had built himself a very beautiful place to not be a person. He had a routine, and the routine was how he survived. Up at 5, markets by past. The car at 7, the office by past again, the day a wall of meetings tall enough to stand behind. He was very good at it. The harbor terminals that bore his family's name moved more cargo than they had in 40 years, and the board, which had once whispered that the young Mr. Vance was too soft for the chair, had stopped whispering. He had made himself into a man who could not be moved. It had cost him nearly everything, and he had paid without looking at the bill. The part of the routine that did not work was the part where he went home. He stood now in the doorway of his son's room, the morning after the diner, watching Theo sleep the way he could only ever sleep after one of the bad nights. Sideways, fists curled, one foot hanging off the mattress, as if he'd run there in his dreams, and stopped just in time. Grey light came in slow off the harbor. On the nightstand sat a cold triangle of grilled cheese, on a paper napkin from a diner called the Blue Hour, which Theo had insisted on carrying home, and which Elias had not had the heart to put in the bin. A woman's voice in his memory said, "I'm not an answer, I'm a person." He had not been spoken to like that in years. People in his life chose their words around him, the way you'd choose your steps around a sleeping animal. He had not realized how much he'd come to hate it until a waitress in a coffee-stained apron had simply declined to do it. Sir, Mrs. Aldous, who ran the household and had run it for Claire before him, appeared at his shoulder with the soundless competence of 30 years' practice. She was a small, upright woman with reading glasses on a chain and a way of delivering bad news like a weather report. The agency called about a replacement. Tell the agency no. Sir, the agency was rather firm that. Tell the agency, Elias said, still watching his son, that my family has been an excellent client for 3 years and that we are now an excellent former client. Theo has refused 7. We are not going to make it 8. Mrs. Aldous was quiet for a moment, in a way that in her amounted to a brass band. The radiator under the window pinged as the heat came up. And the alternative, sir? The alternative was standing in a diner, across town, wiping down a counter, and Elias did not know how to say so without it, sounding like exactly the thing the waitress had warned him against. What would it take to make you the answer to this? He had heard himself say it and known, even as the words left him, that he had reached for her the way he reached for everything now, as a problem to be solved, a position to be filled, a thing to be acquired and put to work so that he would never again have to feel the floor drop the way it had dropped 3 years ago. He had spent 3 years making sure the floor could never drop again. He had done it by making sure there was nothing left up high enough to fall. "I'll handle it," he said. He did not handle it. He thought about handling it for 9 days while the city sweated through an early heat wave, and the harbor lay flat and brassy under the haze. Every morning Theo asked whether they could go back to the diner, and every morning Elias said, "We'll see," in the careful voice, and on the fourth morning Theo stopped asking, which was worse. The boy went flat again, the way he went flat, polite, careful, old in the eyes, a 6-year-old, managing the adults around him so that no one would leave. He ate what he was given. He said thank you. He let the new sitter the agency sent over, read to him, and did not cry when she went. And when Elias came home and asked about his day, he said, "Fine," in a small, even voice with 100 years in it. Elias recognized the flatness because he wore the grown version of it to work every day, knotted into his tie, ironed into his shirts. Watching it close back over his son's face was like watching a bruise come up on someone else's skin and feeling it bloom on your own. On the 10th day, a Tuesday, a press photographer caught Theo and Elias coming out of the pediatric dentist, and the photo ran the next morning under a headline about the lonely Vance hair. The boy, small and unsmiling, the father's hand on his shoulder a beat too tight. By the time Elias reached the office, it had been printed out and set, face up and unremarked, in the middle of the long board table, the way you leave a thing where everyone can see it and without having to be the one who brought it up. The boardroom at Vance Maritime took up a corner of the top floor, 2 walls of glass, the harbor spread below it grey-green and busy, the cranes turning slowly against the haze like the hands of patient clocks. The air smelled of fresh coffee, nobody drank, and the cold mineral tang of the air conditioning. 11 people sat around the table and pretended to read the quarterly figures. The 12th, a polished man named Crane, who collected leverage the way other men collected wine, let the meeting run its course, and then, in the last clean minute before adjournment, set one finger on the edge of the newspaper, as though steadying it in a wind. "A child needs stability, Elias." He said it to the table, for the table, with a small, sympathetic, cutting smile. "Investors notice these things. People do read the gossip pages, even the ones who claim they don't. A man who can't run his own household." He let it sit, and the cranes turned, and somewhere below a ship's horn sounded long and low through the glass. Candidly, some of us wonder what else he can't keep. It was Crane's word. Candidly, though Elias would not learn for weeks how much that single borrowed word would come to cost him, or who else used it, or how a war could be fought entirely in vocabulary. He gathered his papers without hurry, because he had learned long ago that a man who hurries has already lost, and he said something level and forgettable about the figures speaking for themselves. And he watched Crane watch him, and he understood that he had just been shown the first card of a hand that would be played slowly. He drove himself home that night instead of taking the car. He told himself it was the heat, the wanting of air, but his hands turned the wheel toward the harbor and the bright, cheap lights of the blue hour. Before he had consciously decided anything at all, and the closer he got, the lighter something in his chest became, which frightened him more than the boardroom had. It was 11. The night had cooled a little, and the diner's door was propped open to it, and the smell came out to the sidewalk to meet him. Griddle fat and coffee, and warm sugar, and under it, bleach where someone had just done the floor. June was carrying a tray of plates to a table of construction workers, a pencil behind her ear and a smear of flour on her wrist, and she was laughing at something one of them had said. Really laughing, head back, the whole diner warmer for it. And Elias Vance stood in the doorway under the cheap bell and understood, with the cold clarity he usually saved for balance sheets, that he had not come here for a nanny at all, and that this was going to be a great deal more complicated and a great deal more dangerous than a problem to be solved. She saw him. The laugh didn't stop, exactly, but it changed, went private, went careful of an animal noticing weather. "Mr. Vance," she said, when she'd delivered the plates. She didn't come around the counter. She stood behind it, with the espresso machine hissing beside her and the smell of grease and coffee and warm sugar between them like a held breath. "Theo's not with you. He's home, asleep, I hope." Mrs. Aldous is with him. Elias sat at the counter, which put them on the same level, which he had not planned and which felt, immediately, like a disadvantage he didn't mind. "I came to ask you something, and I'm going to do it badly, because I've forgotten how to ask people for things instead of buying them. So I'd ask you to be patient with the asking." June set a coffee in front of him without being asked. Black, she'd remembered. The cup clicked once against the saucer. "That's the most honest thing a man in a suit's said to me all year. Go ahead and be bad at it. My son slept through the night after he met you, the first time in 3 years. He turned the cup a quarter turn on its saucer, a small, precise motion, a man squaring a thing that didn't need squaring. I have a house by the sea in Hartfield. We go for the summer. Every summer it's the same. A new person, a stranger, and Theo spends July deciding whether she'll leave before he lets himself." He stopped, started again, lower. "I'm not asking you to be his nanny. He doesn't want a nanny. He's been very clear to 7 professionals that he does not want a nanny. Then what are you asking me to be?" And there it was, the question hanging in the steam, and Elias Vance, who negotiated 9-figure terms before lunch, found he had no clean word for it. "A summer," he said finally. "I'm asking you to come be a summer. Cook the wrong sandwiches the right way. Tell him the month belongs to whoever's awake. Let him run to someone and have her still be there in the morning." He looked up. "I'll pay whatever a summer is worth. I'll match what you make here and double it. You'd have your own rooms, your time, the sea. I know how it sounds. I know what I sound like. You sound like a man trying to buy a person again," June said, but gently, because she'd been watching his hands and the way he'd folded the napkin from the dentist's photo into a smaller and smaller square in his pocket without knowing he was doing it. "You said you'd be bad at it. You weren't lying, no." She was quiet. Behind her the machine hissed and a cook called an order, and the bell over the door rattled, and the whole warm engine of the place ran on without her for a moment, while she stood very still and did the arithmetic of her life, Nana's care that cost more every month, the nursing program that started in the fall and the tuition that didn't exist yet, the night shifts that were slowly turning her into someone who slept through the daylight world, who'd forgotten what her own street looked like in the sun. And underneath all of it, the boy with the crumb on his cheek, who had run to her first. "One summer," she said at last. "Not because you offered me money, though I'm going to take a frankly offensive amount of it, and you're going to feel good about paying it. One summer, because that kid tested me on a sandwich at 2 in the morning and I passed, and I'm not the kind of person who passes a test like that and then doesn't show up." She pointed the coffee pot at him. "But I'm nobody's solution, Mr. Vance. I told you that. You hire me thinking I'm going to fix your son. You're going to be disappointed because I don't fix people. I just stay. That's the whole skill, I stay." "I don't know how to do that," Elias said before he could decide not to. "I know you don't," said June. "It's the only reason I'm saying it. The word, yes, never got spoken aloud, but it landed between them anyway, plain and enormous. Outside, the city hummed. The bell over the door stayed quiet, and neither of them knew yet that the summer they had just agreed to would take everything they thought they were and turn it, slowly, corner to corner, into 2 triangles and no sad dry edge. But not before it nearly cost them both the thing they'd just, without saying so, begun to want. Hartfield in summer did not look real. It looked like the photograph in a magazine that makes you put the magazine down. June arrived in the late June heat with 1 suitcase and a duffel, and her grandmother's voice in her ears. Do not let those people make you small, Junebug. They put their stockings on the same as everybody. And stood at the top of a gravelled drive, looking at a house the colour of cream, with the whole blue plate of the sea behind it. The gravel gave under her shoes, with a sound like someone slowly eating crackers. Roses climbed a sun-warmed stone wall and threw their smell at her, heavy and almost too sweet, and under it came salt and cut grass, and the green low breath of the sea pulling back over the rocks somewhere out of sight. A flag on a far pole snapped once and went still. She felt, standing there with her whole life in 2 bags, extremely and specifically small. Then a screen door banged, and a boy in swim trunks, and one sneaker came barreling across the lawn yelling, "June, June! Is it your month still?" And the smallness went away, because you cannot feel small with 38 pounds of formerly flat, suddenly bright 6-year-old hitting you at the knees. "It's July in 2 days, June said, hoisting him, his hair smelling of pool, chlorine and sun. "So technically it's about to be your month. What's your July deal?" "July belongs to whoever's brave enough to go in the cold water first." Theo's eyes went enormous. "That's you and me," he breathed, with the holy seriousness of a child accepting a covenant, and June laughed. And somewhere across the lawn, on the wide stone terrace, a woman with silver hair set down her iced tea and watched the waitress laugh with her grandson and did not smile. Vivian Vance was old money the way granite is old rock. It had simply always been there, and it would outlast you, and it did not feel the need to be liked. She had run Hartfield for 40 summers. She had run it for her son when her son could not, in the year the house went quiet. When Theo was 3 and the world had cracked down the middle, and Vivian had held the pieces together with sheer, cold will because someone had to, and the someone could not be the boy's shattered father. She still held the controlling share of Vance Maritime in her own name, signed over to no one in 3 years of grief, and she had earned, she felt, the right to certain opinions. She had a great many of them. "You'll be the waitress," Vivian said, when Elias brought June up to the terrace to introduce them. She did not stand. She looked at June over the rim of her glass, where a slice of lemon hung suspended among the ice, and the sea wind moved her silver hair, and her thumb rested against the cold sweat of the tea. "Candidly, I had imagined someone older." "Candidly," June said before Elias could intervene, "so had I, but here we both are," a silence with weather in it. Theo, oblivious, tugged June's hand toward the water. Elias said, "Mother," in a warning tone that June suspected had never once worked. "I don't dislike you," Vivian informed June, with the air of a woman granting a minor and revocable license. "I don't know you. Those are different things, and only one of them is permanent. You'll forgive me if I reserve judgment until I've seen whether you're the 8th or the last." She lifted her glass an inch, a toast that was also a dismissal. The ice shifted in it with a small bright sound. "The boy has set aside enough people who promised to stay. Go and swim. Mind the rip past the second rock." June took Theo to the water, but she filed it away. Enough people who promised to stay. And she filed away, too, the thumb resting on the cold glass and the photograph she had glimpsed through the open doors of the morning room as they'd passed. A silver frame, a laughing, dark-haired woman, turned to face the chair Vivian sat in every morning, and away from the window, so the light never reached it. The first weeks of that summer were small, and they were enormous, the way the best things are. June learned the house, and the house learned her. She learned where the floorboards gave away a footstep, and which window caught the morning, and that the kitchen at dawn smelled of cold ash and yesterday's bread, and that the sea changed color 4 times before lunch. She learned that Mrs. Aldous, who'd come out from the city with them, softened by exactly 1 degree per week, and had by mid-July Started leaving June the good coffee on the warm corner of the stove where it would keep. She learned that Hale, the groundskeeper who'd worked Hartfield since Elias was a boy, communicated almost entirely in weather reports and disapproval, and would, if you waited, tell you everything. Storm coming Thursday, Hale told her on her first Monday, not looking up from the rose he was pruning, the secateurs clicking, off the water, big one by the smell. He clicked the secateurs again, households, people don't sometimes. The boy doesn't care for thunder. That was the longest speech he made all July, and it turned out to be the most useful, though June didn't know that yet. She learned where Theo hid when he was sad. The boathouse, which smelled of tar and old rope and gasoline, where the water knocked under the boards, and what he did when he was scared, which was go flat and polite, and what undid the flatness, which was being given a job, being needed for something real, being told the truth and trusted to hold it. He doesn't want soft, June told Elias, one evening on the terrace after Theo was asleep. The sea had gone pewter and the first stars were out, and the air smelled of salt and cut grass, and the citronella hail burned in a clay pot against the bugs, the smoke of it sweet and green. A moth or two batted softly at the lantern glass. Everybody keeps trying to give him soft, gentle voices, careful words. He hates it. It feels like the thing people do right before they leave. You want him to trust you. You give him true, and you give him a job. Elias was quiet for a while. He'd taken his jacket off, which she'd never seen, and rolled his sleeves, and in the lantern light, with the day's armor gone, he looked almost like a person you might meet on an ordinary street. Claire used to say something like that, he said. It was the first time he'd said the name to her. It came out carefully, an object handled rarely, set down with both hands. She said our whole class raises children to be comfortable and then wonders why they're not brave. She sounds like she was smart. She was the smartest person I ever. He stopped. Turned his coffee cup a quarter turn. The pottery scraped softly on the stone. She made the sandwiches, he said instead quietly. Diagonal. Butter to the edges. I never knew why he tested you on it. I never knew that's what he was doing. He looked at June across the citronella light, and the smoke drifted between them, and somewhere below the tide turned over on the rocks. How did you know? And here June could have said something kind and smoothing. Instead, she gave him true, because she'd just finished telling him to. I didn't, I guessed. I looked at a scared kid asking me to know something I had no way to know. And I figured the only wrong answer was a careful one, so I guessed like I meant it. She shrugged and rubbed at the flower pail scar on her thumb, the way she did when a thing was costing her something. Half of staying is being willing to guess wrong out loud. The careful ones never guess. That's why he runs them off. They keep waiting to be sure, and he can smell it on them. Sure is just another word for 1 foot out the door. Elias Vance looked at her for a long moment in the dark, and something in his face that had been held shut for 3 years moved, very slightly. Like a door tried in the wind and found not quite locked. You should go in, June said, standing, because her own chest had done the dangerous turning over thing again, and she did not trust the sea air. 5 a.m. comes early, Moneyman. Some of us have a boy to teach to swim. June. She stopped. He didn't look at her. He looked at the dark water. Thank you for guessing like you meant it. Any time, she said, and went inside before either of them could say the next true thing, because she had a strong suspicion the next true thing was the kind you couldn't take back. The storm came Thursday, exactly as Hale had promised, rolling in off the water at dusk, so that the whole sky went the color of a bruise, and the sea got loud, and the first fat drops hit the terrace stone, with a smell like hot dust giving up. June was clearing the kitchen when the power went, all at once, the refrigerator shuddering into silence, the dark coming down so complete that for a second she couldn't find her own hands. Then thunder cracked directly overhead, close enough to feel in the floor, and from upstairs came a sound she would remember a long time. Not a scream, worse than a scream, a thin-held whimper, the sound of a child trying very hard to be no trouble while coming apart. She took the stairs in the dark with one hand on the wall, the plaster cool and gritty under her palm, the house lighting up white at the windows and going black again. She found Theo not in his bed, but wedged in the gap between the bed and the wall, knees to his chest, eyes squeezed shut, shaking, his lips moving in a count he'd clearly been taught by somebody and didn't believe. Rain drummed the glass in sheets. The room smelled of his nightlight's hot dead bulb, and the ozone coming in around the window frame. She did not turn on a torch. She did not say, "It's all right," in the gentle voice. She got down on the floor in the gap with him, her back against the cold wall, and she said in the level diner voice, the 2 in the morning voice, "Okay, I've got a job for you, and it's important, so I need you sharp." The count stopped. One eye opened. "Storms are just the sky's stomach growling," she said. "It's loud and it's rude, and it cannot touch you in here, but I can't count the seconds between the light and the bang, because I'm bad at it. My brain's full of sandwiches. So that's your job. You count for me. Loud. We're figuring out how far away it is, and we're going to watch it leave." Thunder rolled, further off this time. 5, Theo said wobbly, then steadier when she nodded at him in the lightning flash. I got to 5 that time. Good. Last one was a 3. 5 means it's already walking away. It came to the house, it saw we weren't scared, and it got embarrassed, and it's leaving. Another flash. She felt him tense. She put her arm along his shoulders, not gripping, just there, a wall he could lean on or not. Count. 6, he said, and then, astonished at himself, 7. They counted the storm out of the county like that, the 2 of them on the floor, the boy's voice climbing from a whimper to something almost like a game, and June did not notice Elias in the doorway until the worst of it had passed, and the rain had gentled to a steady wash against the glass. He had a torch in his hand, unlit. He had clearly been standing there long enough to learn that he wasn't needed, and to feel about that the complicated thing a parent feels when someone else is the one who can. Later, when Theo was asleep, really asleep, sprawled and open-handed, they stood in the dark hall with the house ticking and dripping around them, and Elias said, "Lo, I'd have turned on every light in the house. I'd have held him so tight he couldn't breathe. I'd have made it worse trying to make it better. You'd have made it about how scared you were that he was scared." June said it wasn't unkind. It was just true, and the dark made it easier to say. Everybody does it. It's the most natural thing there is, and it's exactly wrong. A long beam of a car's headlights swept the wet window and slid away. Give a scared person a job, and you give them back their own 2 hands. That's all. That's the whole trick. It works on 6-year-olds, and it works on construction workers at 2 a.m., and I'd put money it'd work on you. Try it sometime, Elias said, and it came out before he could armor it, and in the dark she heard him hear himself, and neither of them said anything else, because the next true thing was right there again, and the rain was loud, and they were both, suddenly, very aware of how close they were standing in a dark house full of sleeping. The thing about staying is that it works, and the thing about it working is that everyone forgets it was ever in doubt. By August, Theo Vance slept through the night. He slept through so reliably that the household stopped tiptoeing, and the change rippled outward through the house, like warmth through cold water. He learned to swim, really swim, out past the second rock with June a stroke behind him, the 2 of them surfacing into the gold light, yelling about being brave enough for July. The salt stinging their eyes, their laughter carrying flat and bright across the water. He started eating like a person who expected there to be a tomorrow. He started, June noticed and said nothing about, leaving doors open behind him because he no longer needed to know exactly where everyone was at all times in order to breathe. And his father came home at 6. It started as an accident and became a habit, and then became the most important thing in Elias Vance's day, though he would never in this life have said so in those words. He moved meetings. He took calls in the car so they'd be done by the gravel drive. He learned to swim with his sons and his sons. June, whatever June was, the household had stopped trying to name it. He learned, badly, and then better, to sit on the floor and lose at the boys' incomprehensible card games, the cards soft and dog-eared. The rules invented fresh each round to ensure his defeat. He learned the sandwich. Mrs. Aldous found him in the kitchen one morning in August, buttering bread to the very edges, low and slow, frowning at it with the exact concentration he gave the harbour accounts, the pan ticking as it heated. She went out again without a word and stood in the pantry among the smell of flour and dried lavender, with her hand pressed flat against her chest, for a moment, because she had worked for this family a long time, and had not expected to see that particular man do that particular ordinary thing ever again. The humour came back into the house too, slow and then all at once. It came in through June, who could not help it, who teased the way other people breathed. She taught Theo to call the seagulls flying rats, and then had to unteach it when he said it to Vivian at lunch. She nicknamed Elias's enormous, silent, very expensive car the hearse, until even Hale, who disapproved of joy on principle and pruned as though the roses had personally offended him, was caught muttering it as he waxed the bonnet. "You've ruined the staff," Mrs. Aldous told June, setting down the good coffee, her mouth perfectly straight. Hale smiled on Tuesday. "I've sent for a doctor." It was the only joke June ever heard her make, and she delivered it like an obituary, and June laughed for a full minute while Mrs. Aldous watched her with the quiet satisfaction of a woman who has landed exactly one dry shot per summer and made it count. And one warm evening in early August, at the dinner table, with the windows open to the cricket-loud dark and the candles guttering in the sea breeze, Elias Vance made a joke. It was a small joke. It was barely a joke. June had been describing, with great drama, the regular at the Blue Hour who ordered his eggs scared, passed near the pan, never cooked. And Elias, deadpan, not looking up from his plate, said, "I'd like to renegotiate my own eggs along those lines, show them the harbour. Threaten them lightly, never commit." There was a beat of silence, and then June laughed, surprised, delighted the real one, head back, and Theo, who could not have followed the joke, but understood completely that his father had made his June laugh, banged his fork on the table and yelled, "Do it again." And Elias Vance looked at the two of them, lit up and laughing in the candlelight at something he had made, and went very still with the force of how much he wanted to keep it. He made a joke, June told Nana on the phone that night, sitting on the dark terrace with her bare feet on the warm stone, the sea breathing below, a moth ticking at the porch lantern. Vivian's son, Mr. 6 a.m. He made a joke. Nana, about eggs. "And did you laugh, Junebug?" "Course I laughed. It was funny." A pause. The crickets soared. "It was really funny, Junebug." Her grandmother's voice came down the line soft and shrewd, the voice that had caught her in every fib she'd ever told since she was 4. "You be careful out there with those summer people. Summer ends. It's a job, Nana." Said Nana, which was June's own tell, handed down, and which meant, "I have heard you, and I do not believe you, and I love you." And June sat with the phone against her ear, and the warm stone under her feet, and the laughing woman's silver frame somewhere in the house behind her, and did not argue, because you cannot argue with your own tell. What June did not know that night, what no one in the bright, laughing house knew, was that 200 miles away, in the city, the man named Crane had pulled a thread, the way men like Crane pull threads, idly, to see what unravels. He had a photograph taken by a freelancer at a long lens. Elias Vance in the Hartfield surf, laughing, his hand at the back of a young woman's neck as she laughed too, the two of them so plainly, so dangerously happy that the picture did not need a caption. Crane looked at it for a long time in his quiet office. It was not the affair it implied that interested him. He did not, in truth, care a great deal who Elias Vance laughed with. What interested him was that a man who could be made this happy could also be made this afraid, and that a man's softest place is always the one worth pressing. He had spent a career learning that the way to move an immovable man is never to push the man. It is to frighten the people standing guard around him. So he did not send the photograph to the papers. He picked up his phone, and he called the one person at Hartfield who had also, for her own entirely different reasons, begun to be afraid. He called Vivian. The morning room at Hartfield faced east, and Vivian Vance took her coffee there every day of the summer at 6:30, alone before the house woke. June knew this the way you come to know the secret clock of any house you live in, and she had learned to give the room a wide berth at that hour, because some doors are closed for a reason even when they're open. But on a grey morning near the middle of August, with a fog off the sea that muffled the gulls and beaded cold on the window glass, June came down early to start the coffee and found the morning room door ajar and stopped because of what was inside it. Vivian was at the window with the silver frame in both hands. She had turned it toward the grey light. The laughing, dark-haired woman, the one whose picture lived, always angled away from the sun. And she was looking at it the way you look at a person, not a photograph. Her coffee sat cooling and forgotten, a skin forming on it. And her thumb was moving slowly, back and forth across the glass over the laughing face, as though she were rubbing at a smudge that wasn't there, or warming a hand that couldn't be warmed, the gesture of a woman alone, with the one grief she never let the house see. June stood in the hall with the fog at the windows, and the cold tile under her bare feet, and the smell of the coffee she hadn't yet made, and she did not breathe, and she did not speak, and she did not cross the threshold. Whatever this was, it was not hers to walk into. The fierce, granite, judging woman of the terrace was not in that room. The woman in that room was just somebody at a window, holding the last of someone in her, 2 hands. After a long moment, Vivian set the frame down gently, the way you set down a sleeping child, and turned it a few degrees back toward the chair and away from the window, so the light would not reach it, and lifted her cold coffee, and June stepped back from the door, one slow step and then another, the tile creaking once under her heel so that she froze, and then went on down the back hall to the kitchen. She made the coffee with hands that were not entirely steady, the grounds spilling a little on the counter, and she said nothing to anyone, ever, about what she had seen. But she understood Vivian after that, which is a different and more dangerous thing than liking her. She understood that the granite was a wall around a window, and that the woman had spent 3 years standing guard over a grief so large she could not afford to let it move, and that into this fortress had come a laughing waitress who left doors open, and taught a boy to call gulls flying rats, and was slowly getting the one person Vivian had left to start running toward the light again, and that nothing on earth is more frightening to a person braced against the next loss than watching the people they love become once more capable of being hurt. She understood Vivian. She did not, therefore, see the blow coming, because she had made the oldest mistake there is, which is to assume that understanding someone's pain means you know what they'll do with it. It came at the worst possible moment, which is the only moment grief ever chooses. It came on a perfect day. It was late August, the kind of high blue day that knows it's near the end and burns all the brighter for it. They'd taken the small sailboat out, the three of them, and Theo had steered with Elias's hands over his on the tiller, and June had trailed her fingers in the cold green water and tipped her face to the sun, the salt drying tight on her skin, the sail snapping taut overhead. At the bright mouth of the cove, Elias had looked at her over his son's head, with something in his face so undefended that she'd had to look away at the water to keep her own face from answering it. They came in wind-burned and salt-crusted and happy. Theo ran up to the house to tell Mrs. Aldous about the seal they'd seen, his one sneaker slapping the dock. And June and Elias stood on the dock a moment longer than they needed to, the boat knocking softly against the pilings, the rigging ticking in the wind, the warm tar and salt smell of the dock rising around them, and Elias said, not carefully, not in the contract voice, but plain, "Stay past summer." June's heart did the turning over thing. "That's not the deal. I'm renegotiating the deal. A breath. Stay. In the fall. Theo starts school here. There's a good one. In the village. And you said the nursing program. There's a campus 40 minutes up the coast. I looked. He stopped, hearing himself, the man who solved things solving. He started again, lower, true. "I don't want a summer. I want." And he was reaching for the word, the real word, the word June could see coming like a wave you can't stop, and Vivian's voice came down the dock like cold water. Elia's, a word now. And then, to June with a courtesy more cutting than any insult. "Alone if the help would excuse us." June went up to the house. She didn't argue. She told herself it was nothing, a board matter. The city, the harbour. She told herself this all the way up the cove path, the loose stones rolling under her shoes, the late roses heavy on the wall, and across the lawn. And she had nearly made herself believe it when, passing the open windows of the library where the voices were, she heard her own name, and stopped, and could not make herself walk on. Waitress. Elias. Photographed with your hand on her like a... Do you understand what Crane has? Do you understand what it looks like? The board is already whispering that you can't run a household, and now you've handed them a pretty girl with no name and no people and every reason in the world to... Don't. Elias's voice, low, dangerous. Don't you finish that sentence about her. Someone has to. You've lost your judgment. You lost it. The night the child dragged you into a diner and you decided a stranger could fix what we have all been carrying for 3 years. A pause, and then Vivian's voice changed, dropped, and the new register was worse because it was not cruel. It was afraid. I watched you go away from us once. I held this family together with my hands while you were gone somewhere inside your own body. Do you remember? I will not. I cannot. Watch it happen again when she leaves. And she will leave, or she'll stay for your money, and I genuinely cannot tell you which would be worse for that boy. The fog of the morning had long burned off. The afternoon was bright and ordinary, and June stood in it and listened to a quiet voice take her summer apart. Candidly, Elias, Vivian went on, you are not choosing a mother for Theo. You are choosing a cure for yourself. And it is not fair to her, and it is not safe for him, and you know it. The silence from the library went on too long. June stood under the open window, with the late sun warm on the back of her neck, and the smell of the blank roses' hail grew against the wall, sweet and dizzying in the heat, and waited for Elias Vance to say the thing he'd been about to say on the dock. I don't want a summer, I want. She waited for the word. What she heard instead, after that too long silence, was the careful voice. The contract voice. The voice from the first night at the diner, the one she'd warned him about, come back like a tide. You're right, Elias said. I've been unclear. With everyone. With her. A breath she could hear through the window. I'll formalize it. Make her staff, properly, a real position, salary, benefits, a contract through the school year. structured, so it isn't, so it can't be misread. So Theo has stability and no one can whisper, and June has security, and it's clean. It's the responsible thing. I should have done it from the start instead of. June did not stay to hear what he should have done instead, because she had heard the only word that mattered, and the word was staff, and the word was position, and the word was clean. And every cold stone she had carried her whole life rolled back into her stomach and settled into its old familiar bed. She'd been right all along. She had told him at the diner, and she had told him on the terrace, and she had been right. She was not a person to these people. She was an answer, a solution. The most effective available solution to the problem of a motherless boy and a hollow man, to be formalized, structured, salaried, made clean. She had let herself forget it for one summer. She had let herself, God help her, trail her fingers in the water and look away from his face to protect a feeling she had no business having. June walked back to the house, and her feet were very steady, and her hands were very steady, and inside she was as flat and careful and polite as a 6-year-old managing the adults so no one would see him come apart. She knew the flatness. She'd taught Theo there was a way through it. She could not, at that moment, remember what it was. She did not pack that night. She was not that kind of foolish. She would not leave the boy with no warning, would not do to Theo the thing 7 nannies had done. But something in her had gone away from Hartfield already, gone back behind the counter where it was safe, where she was useful and forgettable, and could not be turned into a line item on a clean and structured contract. Theo felt it before anyone said a word. Children always do. He came to find her in her rooms after his bath, hair wet and smelling of soap, in the dinosaur pajamas, and climbed into her lap without asking and put his head under her chin, the way he had that first night at the diner, and said, in the small voice, the careful one, the one she'd worked all summer to coax out of him, "You're going flat. I'm just tired, Bug." No, his whole body had gone tight against her, a bowstring. I know flat. You taught me flat. You're going flat. And that means you're going to leave. Everybody goes flat right before. The nannies went flat, and Daddy went flat the year Mommy. He was crying now, furious and terrified, gripping her shirt in both fists. You said you stay. You said that was the whole skill, you said. And June Calloway held the shaking boy and felt her heart break cleanly down the middle, 2 triangles, and understood that the cruelest thing about being treated as a solution is what it does to the people who actually love you, who cannot tell the difference between you protecting yourself and you abandoning them. "I'm here right now," she whispered into his wet hair, which was truce and not enough and the best she had. "I'm here right now. Feel that I'm right here." She rocked him, slow, the chair creaking, the window open, and the sea breathing below. And somewhere in the house a clock she'd learned, the secret of ticked on toward a morning she didn't know how to meet, right here, right now. That part's not a lie. I promise you the part that's not a lie. It was the longest night of that whole bright summer, and there was no comfort anywhere in it, and June held the boy until he slept, and then sat in the dark with him, heavy in her arms, and did the arithmetic of her life one more time, and could not, this time, make the numbers come out to stay. Elias found her at dawn. She'd put Theo back in his own bed, and come down to the kitchen in the grey light to make the coffee one last time, because her hands needed a job, and he came in already dressed for the city, already armored, and stopped when he saw her face. "You heard." I heard. She didn't turn around. She measured the coffee. The fog was off the sea again, beading cold on the glass, and the kitchen was full of the smell of it, and of the bread Mrs. Aldous had left rising under a cloth. "It's a generous offer, Mr. Vance. Salary, benefits, a contract through the school year. Structured, clean, My grandmother will be relieved. It's more than a waitress could dream of. Each word was a stone she set down precisely on the counter between them. I accept, by the way. I'm not a fool. I'll take the job, and I'll do it well, and that boy will have his stability. She turned around then and let him see the flat, careful face and watched it land. You'll get exactly what you're paying for. You always do. June, that's not. He came toward her and stopped, his hands half raised, a man who'd forgotten how to reach for a person without it being a transaction. I was protecting you. From Crane, from the board, from the things they'd say. I made it clean so they couldn't. You made it clean so. You couldn't, June said. Don't dress it up as me. You felt the floor start to go and you reached for a contract, same as you've done every day for 3 years. I'm not even angry at you for it. I told you the first night you'd want to learn the difference between a person and an answer before your son did. She poured the coffee. Black. She still remembered. She set it in front of him on the counter one last time, the cup clicking on the wood. Well, he learned it last night. He's 6 and he learned it faster than you. He knows the difference between someone who stays because she chose to and someone who stays because she'd S on the books. You should ask him about it. Get there before I do. She picked up her bag. Where are you going? You said you'd. I said I'd do the job. I will. I'm going to see my grandmother. It's Sunday. I have my Sundays. It's in the contract. Now I expect. And I'll be back tonight to make Theo's dinner, structured and clean and salaried, exactly as agreed. At the kitchen door she stopped and did not turn around, and gave him one last true thing, because she'd spent a whole summer teaching his son that true was the only kindness that counted. You almost said it on the dock. I heard you start. You want to know the difference between you and your boy? He'd have finished the sentence. Even scared. Even sure I'd leave. He ran across a whole diner to a stranger because some part of that kid still believes a person is worth saying the word out loud for. A breath. I hope you learn it from him. I really do. He's the best teacher in that house, and he comes free, no contract required. And June Calloway walked out into the cold, bright fog and down the gravel drive, the stones loud under her shoes in the early hush, and did not let herself look back at the cream-colored house or the grey plate of the sea. Behind her in the kitchen, Elias Vance stood holding a cup of coffee he had not asked for and could not drink, looking at the door she'd left open, hearing his son's voice in his head. You said you stay. You said that was the whole skill. And beginning, far too late and exactly in time to understand what it was going to cost him to become a man who finished the sentence. He did not go to the city. He stood in the kitchen until the coffee went cold in his hand, and then he set it down, and he went up the stairs and into his son's room, and sat on the edge of the bed where Theo was awake and flat and careful, watching the door, the sheet pulled to his chin. And Elias Vance did the hardest thing he had done in 3 years, which was to stay in the room with a feeling instead of leaving his own body to escape it. I made a mistake, he told his son. Plain, true, no careful voice. A big one. I tried to keep June by putting her on a list, like the cars and the houses. People aren't on the list. I forgot that. June tried to tell me and I didn't listen, and you tried to tell me and I didn't listen. And now I've hurt her and I have to fix it, and I don't know how. Theo studied his father with the terrible, clear eyes of a child being told the truth for once. You have to run to her, he said, as though it were obvious, because to him it was. Like I did. You have to go where she is and run to her and not be flat. He sat up, the sheet falling away. And you have to know the sandwich. You have to bring the part that proves you know her. That's how she knows it's real and not a trick. She knew my sandwich. You have to know hers. Out of the mouths of the people who run to us first, Elias Vance went to find his mother, because before he could go to June, he had to take apart the fortress he'd let her build around them all, and that meant going to its foundation. He found Vivian in the morning room, in her chair, the cold coffee at her elbow, and the silver frame at its careful angle away from the light. The fog still gathered grey at the glass. He sat down across from her, and for the first time in 3 years he did not let her run the conversation. "You were trying to protect me," he said. "I know that. You held this family together when I couldn't, and I have never told you what it meant. And I'm telling you now, and I mean it for the rest of our lives." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "And you were wrong yesterday, and I was a coward who let you be wrong, because being wrong your way was safer than being brave mine. We don't get to do that to her anymore, either of us." Vivian's chin lifted. "I said nothing to that girl that wasn't. You called her a girl with no name and no people. Her name is June Calloway. Her people are a grandmother she gives her Sundays to, and a whole diner full of regulars who'd lie down in the road for her, which is more people than love either of us, and we both know it." His voice didn't rise. That was the new thing. It didn't have to. "She got my son to leave doors open, Mother. She got me to come home at 6. She made you a sandwich you ate without complaining, which I noticed, and don't pretend I didn't." He let that sit. Then quietly, the cruelest kindness, the true thing. "You're not afraid she'll leave. You're afraid she'll stay, and that we'll all start reaching for the light again, and that the light will get taken away a second time, and you won't survive watching it. I know, I'm afraid of the same thing. We have been guarding a window by building a wall, and the boy is suffocating in here, and so am I, and so I think are you." Vivian Vance sat very straight in her chair with her hand near the cold coffee, and her granite face did not move, and a single tear went down it, ignored, unacknowledged, the way a queen ignores rain. "Candidly," she said at last, and her voice was not steady, "I have never known what to do with a person who refuses to be afraid of me." A long pause. The fog beaded on the glass and ran down in slow threads. She didn't flinch, on the terrace. The first day, no one fails to flinch. She looked at last at the silver frame, and then she did a thing Elias had not seen her do in 3 years. She reached out and turned it, with one finger, toward the window, into the grey morning light, so the laughing face caught what little of it there was. "Claire didn't flinch either," she said, to the photograph, not to her son. "I had forgotten how much She stopped, picked up the cold coffee, set it down again without drinking. "Go and get your waitress, Elias, before some other family with better sense than ours hires her out from under you." And then, because she was Vivian and made of granite and would surrender exactly 1 inch at a time, "And take the boy. She'll want to see the boy. She doesn't run to people. She runs to him." It was full summer dark by the time it was done, because love, when it finally moves, has to wait for the slow machinery of an ordinary day, for the city traffic, and the long coast road, and a grandmother who had to be visited, and a heart that had to be talked down off its old cold ledge. Nana Calloway had taken one look at June, coming through her door at noon with the flat, careful face, and put the kettle on, and not asked a single question, which was how June knew she'd been seen straight through. They sat in the small, bright kitchen that smelled of lemon and old wood, and the bread Nana still baked, though her hands ached, the kettle ticking on the burner, a fly bumping the window screen. June told her grandmother all of it. The diner, and the sandwich, and the swimming, and the storm, and the joke about the eggs and the dock, and the word he almost said, and the word he said instead. And Nana listened the whole way through, and at the end of it, she reached across the table and took June's hands in her 2 warm, crooked ones. "And what did you want him to say, Junebug? It doesn't matter what it is the only thing that matters. What did you want the word to be?" And June Calloway, who could guess a stranger's sandwich at 2 in the morning, but had spent her whole life unable to guess that she might simply be wanted, put her face down on her grandmother's kitchen table, the wood cool against her cheek and smelling of a lifetime of lemon oil, and finally, after a whole brave dry summer, let herself answer. "I wanted him to say he chose me," she said, into the wood. "Not that I'm useful, not that I'm the solution. I wanted to be the thing somebody picks on purpose, just once, just picked, not needed. Picked." She lifted her wet face. "And that's the one thing money can't put in a contract, Nana, and it's the one thing I've never once had, and I let myself want it from a man who buys things, and that's nobody's fault but my own." Said Nana, which meant, "I have heard you, and I love you, and you are about to be surprised," and squeezed her hands and said, "Junebug, the people who've never once been picked are the only ones who'd know it for sure when it finally happened. You'd know, so if a man ever does pull up outside this house and finish his sentence, you do me one kindness." She smiled, fierce and small and 80 years old. "Don't be too proud to hear it. Pride's just fear in its Sunday clothes." The knock came at 8. June opened her grandmother's door to the warm dark, and the porch light hazed with summer bugs, the whole street smelling of cut grass and warm asphalt, giving up the day's heat, and somebody's late barbecue 2 yards over, and there on the step stood Elias Vance. Not in a suit, in no suit at all, in a soft old shirt with the sleeves rolled, the armor gone, looking like a person you might meet, and beside him, gripping his hand, in pajama bottoms and exactly one sneaker, stood Theo, who had clearly insisted on coming and clearly insisted on the sneaker, and who was holding, in his free hand, with enormous ceremony, a paper plate covered by a second paper plate. Nobody said anything for a moment. The bugs ticked against the porch light. Somewhere a sprinkler turned, cha-cha-cha, and stopped. Then Theo let go of his father's hand and crossed the porch and ran to June, ran the whole short way, and wrapped both arms around her and held on, and said into her middle, "Fierce, we came to run to you. Both of us, I taught him." June's hands found the boy's back of their own accord. But she looked over his head at his father, and kept her voice even, because 30 years of cold stones do not roll away for a porch light and a paper plate. "You drove all this way. I did, to bring me to work tomorrow. You could have called. It's in the contract." It was cruel, and she knew it, and she could not help it. The flat, careful self was still standing guard and would until it heard the word. "There's no contract," Elias said. "I tore it up. There's no position. There's no salary, no benefits, no clean structured arrangement through the school year." He came up the steps slowly, the way you approach water you've learned to respect. And he was holding something too, she saw now, a folded square of paper, soft from a pocket, worn to felt at the creases. "I'm not here to offer you a job, June. I'm worse off than that." He stopped one step down, so she stood above him. "I'm here because I'm a man who spent 3 years buying things, so I'd never again have to want something I could lose. And you walked into a diner and made me want you, want all of it, the whole terrifying, breakable thing, and I tried to put it on a list because the list felt safe, and I was a coward, and I'm sorry. That's the apology. It comes with a cost, the way the real ones do." He took the last step. "The cost is, I told Crane this afternoon he can take his whispers to the full board and do his worst, because I'm not going to run my life clean enough to satisfy a man who's never once run toward anything. He may move against the chair. He may win. I may lose the company my family's had for 90 years. He said it steadily, the porch light catching the tired lines of his face. "I find I don't care as much as I'm supposed to. That's the cost. I'm telling you so you'll know I counted it." June's heart was doing something that was no longer turning over. It was climbing. "That's not the sentence," she said, barely. "On the dock, you started a sentence. I know, and here Elias Vance, single dad, billionaire, The man who could not say the soft thing in the soft voice knelt down on her grandmother's porch. Not to propose, there was no ring. It was not that, it was worse and better. He knelt to be eye level with the boy and the woman both, the way she'd knelt the first night to a furious child, and he unfolded the soft, worn square of paper in his hands. It was a child's drawing, scribbly and fierce, 3 stick figures and a sun, done in golf pencil on a diner order pad that he had plainly carried in his breast pocket for 2 months without telling a soul. Theo drew this, the night you guessed his sandwich. 3 of us. I've carried it since. I told myself it was sentiment. He looked up at her, undefended, finished. It's not sentiment, it's a forecast. I want this. The 3 of us. Not because you fix him. You told me you don't fix people, you stay. And I finally understand that staying is the rarest competence there is. And I've watched you do it all summer for a boy who isn't even yours. His voice held. I'm not asking you to be his answer, I'm asking to be chosen. To choose you. June Calloway, I'm choosing you out loud, on a porch, in front of your grandmother and my son, and every bug in the county, with nothing clean about it, and no contract under it, and everything to lose. I choose you. That's the sentence. I should have finished it on the dock. I'm finishing it now. The sprinkler ticked, the bugs hummed against the light. From inside the house came the small, unmistakable sound of an 80-year-old woman pretending not to listen and not pretending well. And June Calloway, who had wanted exactly this one impossible thing her whole life, and had stopped believing it would ever pull up outside her grandmother's house, heard her Nana's voice. Don't be too proud to hear it. And felt the cold stones, every one of them, the whole lifetime's worth, begin at last to roll away. Say the diagonal, she said, thick. What? The sandwich. Theo said you'd bring the part that proves you know me, or it's a trick. She was almost laughing, almost the other thing. You know his. Prove you know mine. What do I want, Elias Vance? Not what do I do. What do I want? And Elias, still kneeling, looked at her. Really looked, the way you look at the one piece of weather you'd wait your whole life in the cold for, and said, quiet and sure, no clause in it, no contract, no careful voice anywhere on the porch. You want to be picked, not needed. Picked. On purpose, by name, by somebody who could leave and doesn't. He held up the child's drawing between them like a deed. I'm picking you. I'll do it every day. I'll do it badly at first, and then better. I'll learn it the way I learned the sandwich. Butter to the very edges, no sad dry corner. Until there's not one part of you that goes unpicked for the rest of my. He didn't get to finish that sentence either, but for the best possible reason. She told the boy first. She would always tell the boy first. That was simply who she was. The booth's always yours, she said into his hair, and the diagonal and the laugh. And then she looked at Elias over Theo's head and gave him his own word back, the way you hand a man the tool he came in with. And evidently, she said, the trial's gone long. And she reached out with the hand that wasn't holding the boy and took Elias Vance by his open, empty, offered hand, the drawing and all, and let him pull 2 or 3 of them up off the porch together into the warm summer dark. And somewhere inside the house, her grandmother turned the kettle back on for 3. There was a cost still to pay, and it came due that autumn, because real apologies don't get to stay free. Crane moved against the chair at the September board meeting with his photographs and his whispers, and Elias Vance stood up in the long, panelled room, with the harbour glittering hard and cold through the windows and the radiators knocking against, the first chill of the season, and did the thing he'd promised June he'd do. He told the truth, all of it, plainly, and offered the board his resignation if a man who'd chosen a waitress and a child over a clean image was a man they couldn't trust with their cargo. What he had not forecast, what saved him, was that he was no longer the only person at that table willing to finish a sentence out loud. Vivian Vance, who had not attended a board meeting in 3 years, who still held more shares than any name in the room, rose at the foot of the table in grey silk with her chin up and her thumb at rest on the polished wood, and looked at Crane the way Granette looks at weather. "Candidly," she said, into the silence, "I have set down a great many things in 3 years, including, very nearly, my son, and I will tell you what I did not set down, which is my arithmetic. This company has had its best 3 years under that man, and he has had his best summer under that woman, and I have watched a child who would not sleep learn to swim out past the second rock." She let her gaze travel the table, unhurried. "You want to put that to a vote against a photograph, and a man who has never built anything in his life but leverage." She let it sit, terrible and total. "I vote with my son. I vote with the waitress. Mr. Crane, you may keep your photographs. We'll all of us be in them, eventually, if we're fortunate, laughing where the light can reach us." She sat. "I am finished." It was not in the end even close. Crane kept his shares and lost his thread. Elias kept his chair and stopped caring whether he did. And Vivian Vance went home to Hartfield that night and walked into the morning room and turned the silver frame with one finger all the way toward the window, into the last of the autumn light, where the laughing dark-haired woman could see, at long last, the whole bright breaking ordinary world her boys were learning to run toward again. She came to the diner herself, a week later, which no one ever expected and no one ever forgot. She came in grey silk through the cheap rattling bell into the smell of coffee and griddle fat and the cold autumn street that followed her in, and she sat at the counter like anyone, her spine very straight on the cracked stool, and she set down on the worn formica in front of June a small card, soft and stained at one corner, a handwritten recipe in a slanted, long Argo hand, bread, butter to the edges, low and slow, cut on the diagonal, the way tea likes it. Claire's hand, the last of it, the thing Vivian had kept in a drawer for 3 years and let no one touch. June picked it up. She read the one line. She did not say anything, because there was nothing in the whole bright diner that needed saying. "Candidly," Vivian said, looking not at June but at the pie case, her voice perfectly even, her gloved thumb resting on the counter's chipped edge. She cut it on the diagonal too. "I had begun to be afraid I was the only one left who remembered, and that when I went it would go." A pause. "It appears I was mistaken. It appears it's safe with you." She stood and smoothed her silk, and at the door she turned, granite to the last. "You'll want it toasted, I imagine, the way you do everything, insufferably warm." And Vivian Vance, who would never in her life admit to laughing, very nearly laughed and went out into the autumn street and left the recipe on the counter in June's keeping, which is to say in the family's, which is to say home. The umbrella went back up at the cove the next summer, striped, exactly where it had been, and no one took it down again. They were a strange and ordinary family after that, in the way the best families are strange and ordinary. June kept her Sundays for her grandmother, who came out to Hartfield in the warm afternoons, and sat in the shade with a glass of iced tea sweating in her hand, and told Theo improving fibs about June's childhood, and Theo, who hoarded every story like treasure, repeated them back wrong on purpose to make Nana correct him, the two of them cackling on the lawn while the sprinkler ticked. June started the nursing course in the fall, in the day hours, the way Elias had promised, on the morning she'd let herself believe in the fall. And the fall had turned out to be a real place after all, with her name in it, written in a hand that did not erase. Vivian learned slowly and badly, and then better, to leave the season half-organized. She put the photograph back in the morning room, but kept the curtain open now, so the light reached it, and on Sunday afternoons she could sometimes be found at the top of the cove path with the boy, the sea breathing below and the salt wind moving her silver hair. telling him true things about the laughing woman in the silver frame, her thumb at rest on her own knee. She and June arrived, eventually, at the particular dry fondness of two women who have fought once, honestly, and respect what the other one is made of. Candidly, Vivian told her one evening, the candles guttering, "I cannot think how this house ran before the diner," which from Vivian was a love letter, and June said, "You want that toasted." And Vivian, who would never in her life admit to laughing, laughed. Elias learned to make the sandwich. He learned to come home at 6. He learned, hardest of all, to say the soft thing in the soft voice, in small, clumsy increments, butter to the very edges, low and slow. "I'm glad you're here." Instead of a clause, "Stay." Instead of a contract, "I love you." Said exactly once and correctly, on the warm rock at the top of the path, with no one to perform it for, and no door locked anywhere on the property, while below them the summer sea breathed, and a sailboat crossed the bright mouth of the cove, and the smell of the roses came up the hill on the wind. And on a hot night near the end of that first married summer, June Calloway worked one last shift at the Blue Hour. For old times, for the send-off, for the regulars. And at 2 in the morning the loose bell rattled, and she looked up from the coffee station out of habit, the smell of fresh grounds, sharp in the quiet, the grill ticking as it cooled. And there was a small boy easing the glass open with both hands, in pajama bottoms and one sneaker, slipping through the gap like water, finding the one crack it trusted. Behind him, holding the door, his father, in no suit at all. Theo crossed the empty diner and climbed straight into the corner booth. The good one, the window one, the best seat in the house, and patted the blue vinyl beside him, and looked up at June with eyes that were not flat anymore, and not careful anymore, just a kid's eyes waiting for his person. "The good booth," he said. "Come sit, nobody can sneak up on us." And June set down the pot and slid in beside the boy who had run to her first, in the booth where all of it had started, with the man she'd chosen and been chosen, by holding the door open behind them into the warm summer dark. And she understood, finally, all the way down where the cold stones used to be, that she was not the most effective solution and never had been. She was the one they ran to. She was the one they kept. She was at long last home.